For a long time, my research has been about the relationship between science and truth. So there are these two radically opposed lines of thought. You've got one camp, people who want to look at the history of science, say there's been all these revolutions in scientific thinking and scientists of the past were wrong, but probably the scientists of the present are wrong as well. And the future scientists will look back on us in the way we look back on past scientists. So there are going to be these future scientific revolutions. So science isn't getting at the truth, according to that camp of people. This other line of thought is that we do science a lot better now than they did science in the past. Science is getting at the truth most of the time. We know about a lot of things. We know how viruses work, we know how stars work. So I've been trying to work on this debate, and I've been looking at the concept of misleading evidence, the idea that evidence can make you think that your theory is correct, or at least approximately correct, but you were just misled by the evidence. In the same sort of way you can be misled by evidence in everyday life. You think that that's your train, you had good reasons for thinking it, you get on the train, but you were misled somehow by the timetable or something. This can happen in science as well, and there are lots of examples from the history of science. So I've been looking at some of these examples from the history of science, saying, why were the scientists misled? Could they have realised it at the time, or is it only in hindsight that you can look back and say the evidence was misleading and there's nothing you could do about that? And maybe we're being misled right now. We think the evidence is strong for all of these different ideas, but we're being misled, maybe. Or is this just really rare? And sort of cherry picking these examples from the history of science where scientists were misled, but there's sort of, one in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000 examples. I ended up writing a popular article for The Conversation, it's an online magazine. Quite a short article, really. It was about examples of scientists being misled in the history of science. But I wasn't trying to say that we shouldn't trust science or something. I was just saying these examples are actually quite rare, but scientists are occasionally misled by the evidence. So this was picked up by somebody at NASA Goddard, surprisingly, who had been casting around on the internet looking for somebody who maybe had a different way of looking at things. And they were curious about the possibility that they were being misled by evidence in exoplanet science, generally speaking. So maybe we're looking at the wrong planets to find life, for example, or maybe what looks like a biosignature isn't a biosignature, or what looks like it isn't life, it is life, or something like that. So could they be being misled? And so they read this article and they ended up inviting me out there to NASA Goddard, and I gave this talk. In preparation for the talk, I read this big long document, the Exoplanet Science Strategy document, which is a 150-page document that's written by the National Academy of Sciences. And this was really interesting because in the first few pages, they made a big deal of the fact that they wanted to expect the unexpected in exoplanet science, because there had been all of these examples in the last 20 years where they'd been really surprised by something. So, for example, they found a planet that was hotter than some stars. Originally, they dismissed the idea as ridiculous, but then in the end it was true. There are planets that are hotter than some stars. They were finding planets in abundance that are these super Earths or mini Neptunes that don't exist in our solar system. And they were really surprised by this, that there are so many of this type of planet that doesn't feature in our solar system. And they were also finding planets in the wrong place, so to speak, planets where we wouldn't expect to find them. So because of all of these surprises over the past 20 years, there was this claim at the beginning of this big document that we should expect lots of surprises in the next 20 years. So we should expect the unexpected. But as you read this long document, although this is stated at the beginning, for the rest of the document, the strategies they put forward are based heavily on expectations. That idea that we should expect the unexpected doesn't really come up again anywhere in the rest of the document. So my talk that I gave at NASA Goddard when I went across was that maybe they should look at different ways in which they could expect the unexpected. And how would you even do that? So one of the ideas that I suggested was that funding should be put in to help scientists with what are called high risk, high reward projects or ideas. So these are projects or ideas that you sort of expect to fail, because that's what high risk means. Maybe only 1 in 10 will succeed, but the 1 in 10 that succeeds, you'll get a high reward. It will really give you something amazing. So for example, you might explore something that is hugely unexpected, and most of the time it won't lead anywhere, but when it does, you'll find some really radically unexpected phenomenon in the universe. For example, a planet that has life but isn't in the classical habitable zone. So there's this habitable zone where we expect to find life in solar systems like ours. And it's sort of where the Earth is right now. That's why the Earth is so good at supporting life. And you wouldn't think you'd find life outside of that habitable zone. Even that idea has been overturned recently, because we expect that there might be life on some of the moons around Saturn and Jupiter, which are way outside the habitable zone. But for example, in the moon Enceladus, we think that there's a large body of water underneath the ice, and we think that body of water is a temperature which could support life. So that's an example of a moon that's out there that might support life in our own solar system, way outside the habitable zone. So there were lots of ideas casting about in the astrobiology community, in the exoplanet science community, that maybe they're missing things. So this led to me writing an article in the International Journal of Astrobiology called "Expecting the Unexpected in the Search for Extraterrestrial Life," where I explore ways in which we might go about identifying unexpected phenomena or not missing things. Scientists always have their biases. Everybody has their biases in pursuing things. If you expect certain things, then you're going to have certain strategies designed around those expectations. But sometimes those biases lead you astray. So this article is exploring ways in which you might avoid that. And one way is perhaps to have a balanced portfolio of projects in the scientific community. So the majority of your projects are going to be what you might call low-risk projects, sometimes called low-risk, low-reward. The project's going to succeed. It's not trying to do anything groundbreaking, but it's going to make an incremental change in our pursuit of knowledge. Then you've got high risk, high reward at the other end. And these are the projects you do expect to fail. But you want to make sure you're funding a certain number of these. One of the problems there is that because you expect most of them to fail, that looks bad when they've been to the funder, perhaps, when they've been funded and then they fail. And somebody somewhere will say, why didn't you fund my project? My project was a sure thing. It was going to go somewhere interesting. But you funded this project and it failed. And what the funder would say is, well, I want to fund maybe 10 of these, and only one will succeed, but then it will give us these high rewards. This is sort of the balanced portfolio idea, that you put most of your funding into safe projects, but you do want to put some funding into the high risk projects. And maybe you want some in between as well, which is sort of medium risk, medium reward. So some funders are exploring this idea that they're going to pursue this balanced portfolio, and that might actually change the way in which some of these funders approach funding scientific projects. It's not just about the project in front of you for the funder. It's about funding this portfolio. So these ideas brought me into contact with the UK Centre for Astrobiology up in Edinburgh, and I gave a talk up there, and several of the scientists there wanted to then collaborate on a bigger project, which is looking at exploring high-risk strategies in contemporary astrobiology. So we've just put in a proposal for a big project to one of the funders, and we're waiting to hear back on whether that will be successful. So fingers crossed.